Oh gosh, I feel like that's probably most people. I am Peter D. Baker. I use my middle initial because there is another guy with the exact same name, first and last, who writes for the New York Times, who is way more famous than I am. Uh, we write very different things. He is a political correspondent. I write currently fiction novels, and those are, I guess you'd call them urban fantasy novels.
Hmm.
And I have two out, and they are part of a series. And I've been writing for a long time. And before I started doing fiction, I used to do a bunch of nonfiction, including two fitness related books, and then a bunch of shorter form stuff on blogs and various places on the internet.
What shifted you from writing the nonfiction to the fiction? Did you find it either easier or harder?
Um, well, I had the idea to write the first book in the series for like a long time. I don't know if you remember Blockbuster Video. It was a
Yeah.
video to exist back in the day. So I was working there, and some friends and we sometimes after work would play tabletop role playing games.
Mhm.
And I made a character that I played who had a daughter that never got featured in the games because I never made her into a character. But I figured, yeah, I should do something with that character one of these days. And so I did. And I started off doing nonfiction. I think the first thing I did was music reviews for my college newspaper, and then fitness blogging, and then all sorts of other stuff, which a lot of that stuff you can find on my Medium website. And so yeah, I figured it was just time to do that, and that was when I had a bunch of free time in 2019. So I started working on that novel and finished it not long after, and then like 2.5 years later published it. Um, as for what's harder, I would say at first fiction was harder, and I think that was because I had never done it before. So like the first novel was kind of the first big piece of fiction that I tackled, like for the first time ever in
Yeah.
life. But even that's gotten a little easier over time.
Comes with practice.
Yeah, and that was for both. Like I did so
Mm.
much stuff, like it just became like pretty easy, and it's just something I can do now because I'd done it for so long.
What inspired your urban fantasy series?
So there was that game that we played. It was called Vampire the Masquerade, and there were most people haven't heard of it because everybody's heard of Dungeons and Dragons, but it was a fairly popular game, and it came out in 1991, and they've had a few iterations ever since, and they took a lot of vampire lore and used it in a lot of neat ways. And when it was time to start writing the story for that character, I just said, well, I was playing a game about vampires. I should probably do something vampire related and keep that going. And yeah, and then I moved from Tampa, Florida to Seattle, Washington. And I was like, well, this is a nice enough city. I could work with that.
Doesn't don't need to create a whole new world for it. I can just use the use Washington to drive the
Like
book.
of it because that sounds like it would be a lot of work to like create a whole new world.
Yeah.
But it is a little easier to like create places that might not necessarily exist within an already existing landscape. And then for the second book, I did make like a new small town that served as a key place in there. And yeah, it's just kind of easier for me whenever it's already in a world that is kind of already laid out because then I can go and look at maps and
Yeah.
look look at news things that happened on particular days and maybe try to like not necessarily use them for the story, but make them happen while the story's happening and reference them. That's why I think that's kind of neat. And yes, it is definitely easier because then all I have to do is focus on like having decent ideas.
And just having really great characters as well.
Yeah, well, I hope people think they're great. I think they're okay.
What drew you to writing in the first place?
That's a good question. I think I was in 11th grade, and I read something. I think it was Candide by Voltaire, and it made me laugh out loud, like actually laugh out loud, not like me reading and saying, "Oh, this is kind of funny," and then just kind of going on. But I was like, I could probably do that, and I I express myself better in writing than I do in talking, mostly because I get to think about what I'm gonna say before I say it.
Makes it easier, and you can actually. So, are you a plotter or a pantser in your writing?
Well, I think part of the trouble with the first book was I tried not having an outline,
Yeah.
uh, but also like I didn't really know what I was doing in terms of writing fiction. I mean, I kind of knew how stories worked because 11th grade English class we talked about stories, talked about them in all my English classes actually, and but I didn't really know how to put together a book, so I just kind of winged it. And then I got help from a developmental editor uh, who was absolutely wonderful. And she's like, "Yeah, you should probably structure it certain parts this way." And I was like, "Oh, that makes sense." And then that's the kind of stuff I carried over into the next one. But then for the next book in the series, I was like, I should probably like plan out key events. So nothing too huge in terms of like planning, but more like I want this thing to happen. Maybe they'll get there starting off this certain way, and then if something happens along the way that I think would be cool, I could probably explore that because I know I'm still going to go back to the place I need to go, if that makes sense.
Yep.
But I would say it's kind of both ish.
Got an outline there to sort of keep you on track, but the story and the characters can take you wherever you want, but you can still end up back at the
Yeah, and I do like
point.
ending up in the places that I planned. And it's like a very small outline. It's like now that I have a Kindle Scribe, which I absolutely love because it feels like I'm writing on paper, but I'm not.
Mhm.
I can it comes out to like 2 pages maybe, 2 pages of stuff, and then you just kind of fill in the blanks.
Always helpful, especially if you on a time crunch as well, and you can just
Yeah,
put out the words.
and then to like actually get the writing done, like as far as the writing process is, I'll set a timer for like 20 minutes,
Mhm.
and before that I'll consult the outline and say, oh, I want them to end up here, and then set the timer, and then don't stop writing for 20 minutes, and then I can get about 800 to 1,000 words in that time. And I try to do that twice a day.
Wow. Cool.
So it's not like a whole bunch of actual time writing, but there's a lot of thinking and actually having to do it that become,
Slowly,
yeah.
slowly chipping away at the words.
Yeah.
Uh, what is your approach for character building? Do you sort of go through along the lines of like role playing the RPG sort of profile?
What? I thought about it like that, but I think in a way I kind of do, maybe unconsciously, or at least I did, because like for Bethany, the main character of the first book, I said, well, she's got to be strong because she fights, and you have to pierce a vampire's rib cage with a stake. So you're thinking like, man, what would you need to actually be able to do that? You need some skill points in fighting, or fighting based skills. You would need a high strength score, that type of thing. So I guess in a way, yeah, I kind of do. And when and when there's magic involved, I do think about it in terms of the role playing games, because for me that's kind of easy. It's like, oh, this powerful spellcaster of some kind can do this kind of thing. How powerful do I want this person to be, and what can they do? Not like going in and ripping off like the same spells for the most part,
Mm.
but just kind of using it as a template, maybe.
How do you go about adding in the magic into the world?
I try to do it as little as possible because it's complicated. Well, and when I when I do use magic, I think somebody shared with me like Brandon Sanderson's three rules of magic, and I thought that was very neat because it goes from like least complex to more complex,
Yeah.
and I like the idea. So I like the idea of Bethany saying, "What is the way that I can solve this without doing any kind of magical stuff?" And then because I like the idea, I think the first rule in that article that I read by Brandon Sanderson, and I really can't compare it to his work because I actually haven't read any of it yet. Um, Even though I've heard it's great and I've watched some of his videos, like he seems like he knows what he's doing, and a lot of people love his books, and he's very prolific. Just haven't gotten around to reading them yet, but I like the idea of having intended and unintended consequences for magic. So that informs the main character's choice on not using it.
I guess that makes it a really good system as well, that you've got the both sides of the coin with what using magic and not using magic.
Yeah.
Did you have a favorite moment in one of your books to write?
Uh, I don't know how familiar you are being Australian with American pro wrestling from the 1980s.
Not
Uh,
very.
well, even some people in the States here are not familiar with pro wrestling from the 1980s. But there was an event that I was a fan of that people that are in my life had been to and followed on TV back in the 80s. And I said, it'd be cool to incorporate that. So I thought actually writing out them at the wrestling match was kind of fun.
I think writing real events that happened into books and sort of taking that atmosphere as well is really fun to do.
And it became like a kind of a big goal for the characters was to go to this wrestling match, but then all the actual story stuff occurs on the way there because they get stranded.
Very good events happening to suit your characters as well. You're
Yeah,
almost there, but not quite. Which of the characters do you relate to the most and why?
it's a good question. And you're talking about my characters, right?
Your characters.
I'm pretty sure at least two of my characters, like me, are autistic. So that's a pretty big one. Um, I don't know. There's like pieces of all of them that I kind of put either myself or people that I know into. Not like fully, but a couple traits.
Mm. The best way to make the characters is to base it off some traits of people you know.
Yeah, and a lot of them, a lot of different ones will take interest that I have. Some of them like movies quite a bit, much like I like movies quite a bit.
Makes it more able to relate to them as well.
Yeah.
How has writing and publishing books changed the way you see yourself?
Gosh, honestly, I wonder if it has. Then again, I wonder how I see myself in general. That's a good question. Usually, like it helps me how I interact with people because I've always been around people who like writing or who have written or wanted to write. So I always try to now that I know the process of it, I always try to share that information with people and try to demystify it because in some ways it's hard, but in other ways it's like kind of easy because like honestly, in some ways getting the manuscript out is kind of I don't know, kind of the easy part for me anyway.
Mm.
Even if it takes forever, even if I erase things and go back and fix them and all that, but then after that, it's like, you got to find a cover, you got to get your ISBNs, got to do this and that all on the back end. You got to format it, and that's the kind of stuff I think that people don't think about because, like,
Yeah.
you're first going in to writing a book, it's like, oh man, I got to do like all these massive amounts of word counts and massive amounts of pages because like how the hell am I going to fill up 300 pages? But that part to me becomes like kind of easy, especially if you have some sort of semblance of a plan.
Yes, it would be. But I think people forget about, you need to market your book, you have to promote your
That
book, you've got everything else you have to do.
yeah, and then like like getting your first draft is like part one, and honestly, in some ways, because my my weakness is like keeping track of continuity, and I hate doing that. It's very difficult. Going back and fix that, that's like way harder than actually getting through the story for me anyway.
Sort of like, I already written the story, why do I have to edit it again?
Yeah, and then or like stuff that you repeat
Mm.
and stuff like that, and going back and fixing those, and now going back in and writing now a couple of other things that are not out yet. Now that I know what the weakness was before, it's like, oh hey, go back and I could put little notes in the Google Doc comments that says, hey idiot, go back and fix this on your next read through. And I usually phrase it exactly like that too. Because then because at some point I'll forget that I put that comment in there and I'm like, oh, there's a comment here. And it's not from a critique partner or anything. Oh, it's from me. And then it's like, oh, I should go back and fix this.
Future self, you need to correct what I presently have
Yeah,
done.
yeah, exactly. And I think a lot of online, a lot of people are very concerned about like what software to use for writing. I think as long as you can make notes to yourself like that, it doesn't really matter, just so long as you get the words on the screen or page.
You don't need anything fancy.
Yeah, no, I don't see the utility in a lot of fancy stuff. Although I do hate Microsoft Word for some reason.
Fair enough. Are there any books or authors that inspired you in your writing?
There's quite a bit. So there was the Voltaire Candide, and back in those days, I also used to read quite a bit of Hunter S. Thompson. I don't know if you're familiar with him down there, but he was a fairly famous journalist up here in the States. Wrote a lot of books on politics, uh, columns on sports as well, which is crazy because I don't even really care for sports all that much. Um, so he was a pretty big deal. Uh, Oscar Wilde, he's pretty
Mhm.
solid. Um, there's an indie author out there. Her name's Gillian Dowell, and she's absolutely fantastic. And I think probably my favorite author. And lately, I've been reading books by this Japanese guy, Keigo Higashino, and he wrote a book. He wrote a series of books called I think it's just called the Detective Kaga series, and Kaga is the main detective, and he goes and solves crimes in a very fun way. Because the central premise of those books is that you might figure out who did the crime early on, and they might even explicitly tell you who did the crime early on. But then the rest of the story is uncovering the whole motive behind it, and that's like Detective Kaga's thing is you can't really give anybody closure on a case until you figure out exactly why the crime happened in the first place. And I found out, and I feel kind of ripped off about this, that in Japan there are 9 books in the series, and only 4 of them made it to English translations.
Oh Lord, that's annoying.
Yeah, but I mean, he did a good job of not leaving anything out because you always expect people when there's a series involved to maybe not start at the beginning, so they always like refer back to each other. And he doesn't spend like a long time going over stuff of the previous books.
That's good. He
Yeah,
needs.
so you can jump in those books kind of wherever you want. And in addition to that, I also recently read The Vampires of El Norte by Isabel Cañas. She
Very.
also wrote Hacienda, which I think is maybe a little more popular than The Vampires of El Norte.
I think the trend goes through the vampire phases as well, depending on.
Oh yeah, it definitely does. And there's a character in my first book in the series, Rain City Gothic, where Bethany meets a teacher who taught literature and the occult at a university, which was a class I took when I was in university. And the character has the same name and is pretty much the same teacher I had. she was just such an interesting person in real life. I figured I should write her as a book character too because she was that great. But she always talked about how like during times of great worldly turmoil, vampires tend to become popular. And the last big resurgence at the time when I was in college was Twilight.
Yeah.
And there were all kinds of things, especially in the United States, that were going on that were a little tumultuous.
Yes, definitely.
And then if you think back to when Bram Stoker wrote Dracula, also, like turn of the century was around the corner.
It's crazy how those trends happen.
Yeah,
What advice would you give to a writer working on their first book?
just write the goddamn thing and don't stop until you finish because you can always fix it on the second go round. Because the first time it's not going to be the best.
You always got your future self to help you make the book better.
Yeah, and that's how anything goes too. Like, I mean, that's why they hammered home in school, like, you should first draft and then your final copy's due whenever it's due, like at a later date.
Mm. They were helping all the budding authors.
I mean, in a way they were, and like all that nagging about having a plan back in grade school really paid off because in college I was like, man, I really need to plan out because I took like a research class and I was writing a paper and I wanted to present it at a conference and spoiler, I eventually did, but I was like, man, I really should like plan this out because this is a lot of my head. And I was like, wow, this shit really works. I should do this again. So for every paper after that, I planned it. And then I kind of did the same thing for, when I was doing like blogging and especially the more research oriented blogs that I did, the planning helps. And then it gets to a point where maybe you don't need to plan out as much because people talk about Stephen King and how he just kind of wings it the whole time, but I don't really think he's winging it. He's just practiced so much, he kind of knows what to do, even if he's not conscious of knowing what he's doing.
He's written that many books, he knows what to do. He doesn't need a plan.
Yeah, like, yeah, and he's also insanely prolific.
Yeah.
And I
Do you,
think it's too because people always say, like, oh gosh, how are these authors getting these books out so quickly? They have to be using AI, but he's been doing it since the 70s.
yeah,
Or people use typewriters.
he's just got all those worlds and everything in his head.
Yeah, no, some people just work extremely quickly.
Mm. Do you have a favorite writing snack or drink?
No, but I pretty much only drink water and coffee most of the time. And then since I only do it in 20-minute bursts, I don't really stop the writing during that 20-minute timer. And then after that, then I go back and drink some more water and whatever.
Good way to do it though. In those 20 minutes bursts, do you have music playing or is it silent?
Usually pretty silent. And there are times though when I will deviate from that. Like uh there's certain parts like I think in a current work in progress I just had to I put like a newspaper article in there that a character had written, and that's not something I spent 20 minutes on. For one, it's been a long time since I've written for a newspaper. It's like I should put some thought into this. Uh, so I should do that. Or like if I'm approaching like one of those big key moments, usually the climax, I'll not do the timer and just go a little slower. And usually during those kind of times, I'll throw something on TV that I've seen like 85 million times.
Yeah.
And I'll throw something on TV more than I'll listen to music. For some reason, I find the music distracting in a lot of ways.
I
And
guess it's
or
easier to tune out stuff on the TV that you've seen already than listening to
yeah,
music.
yeah, even if it's music I've listened to several times as well, and I have no idea why that is, but it's kind of neat because I know some people swear by music when they write.
Mm. I even when I'm reading, it's normally like background noise with TV or a show that I've already seen that I can just ignore and just have to read.
See, when I'm reading, I don't like having like a TV on. I could do fine with music. I could tune that out easily when I'm reading.
Complete reverse.
Yeah, wild.
And my final question is, who has been the biggest supporter of your writing?
Honestly, my dad probably.
Mhm.
He was like extremely supportive. He bought like 6 hardcover copies of book one and gifted them to people, which I wasn't expecting him to be like an asshole about it, but I did not expect him to. I mean, that's like $180 because hardcovers are expensive, and so that was kind of nice. And he's always been pretty supportive of uh, pretty much anything I did, no matter how long or short lived it might have been.
You always need your family, and people closest to you to be the biggest supporter and cheerleaders and sort of
Uh,
help book.
that's not always the case, but like it is kind of nice.